make it back in the shop with the little engine we pulled out of our 1960 John Deere 430 two-cylinder tractor. It's called a two-cylinder because the engine has two cylinders. This engine's, I think, rated around 28, 29 horsepower. Pretty similar to and the design's essentially the same, 430 to 420 tractors. The 420s kind of were the first series to have this make up this horsepower. 430 had a couple tweaks to kind of make it unique, but nothing too over the top. The goal is to start taking things apart. I'll probably clean it up a little bit first. Before we do that, thought we'd just take a quick little tour around the engine to show you what's what and see what this thing's all about. So on the outside, distributor, oil filter housing. One unique thing on the 430s is they had an electrical sending unit that sent the oil pressure up, reading up to a gauge in the dash. 420s just had a gauge screwed in right here directly to the housing. Dipstick 430 block. This was actually kind of unique to it. Maybe some later 420s had that, but the dipstick opening on this one's a little bigger. Some good looking oil in there. 420 series had a smaller port. I think they made this one bigger on the 430 series so you'd have a easier time with your oil changes putting oil in here rather than dumping it in the breather up on the top of the valve cover. Working our way around the front of the engine, we have a hydraulic pump. This is live power, meaning it's constantly circulating. This pump's a little different in color. You see that, what I'm going to call buff yellow John Deere primer. Makes me think this pump was replaced at some time in the past. When you get a tractor that's had a new old stock part put on it, you'll often find it in that color. So I'd have to think that that hydraulic pump was a replacement at one point. Crankshaft pulley, fan. Underneath all that gunk, there is a governor in there that helps regulate engine speed and, based on throttle and whatnot. And over here you get a better view of the water pump, which of course sits right behind the fan. Water pump, water manifold. 420s, 430s utilized a water pump for more efficient cooling. The earlier two-cylinder engine similar to this design in a 40 and M tractor had what was called a thermosiphon circulation system, where the water temperature was regulated just by I guess thermal currents as it would flow through the engine and through the fan to the radiator and whatnot. Increased power, probably increased heat, necessitated a water pump in the 430, 420 series. This was the old port where the dipstick was on the 420 series tractors. They kind of kept probably some of the same molds for the castings and stuff, but just machined them different. This tractor, the exhaust manifold is orchard exhaust, meaning that the muffler would come down and go out under the tractor, versus the standard manifold, which would go up through the hood. This tube is just a little vent that would eventually connect up to the gas tank that goes down. And we go to the back, and we've got our flywheel and two-stage clutch. This tractor was equipped with live PTO. What would happen is your clutch pedal would have effectively like two stages, if you will. You press your clutch pedal halfway, it pushes these forks in, releases a clutch disc between the first set of plates and the flywheel. That basically allows your tractor to stop, but allows your PTO to keep spinning. So you have live PTO if you were, let's say, mowing or brush hogging or whatever other task might benefit from that. To press your clutch level a little farther, these forks fingers would push in against the throwout bearing, and then that would eventually release the inner disc, and that would stop the live PTO at that point. So all in all, not too Not too much to look at, deal with on the outside. We'll, like I said, we'll give it a little cleaning up and start digging in to see what surprises await us on the inside. So let's get to it. The water pump. The water pump mounts to the engine block with 3 Allen head screws. It's kind of hard to see them underneath all the grease, but I assure you they're there. Before we take the actual pump off, I'm going to remove the fan, probably the belts, and we may even remove this water return line that returns the coolant back to the radiator at the bottom. To do this job, you simply need a 3/4 inch wrench, some Allen head wrenches, in this case maybe a little screwdriver to clean the grease out of the holes. Optional, I usually have a little baggie that I put all my bolts and little parts in. Helps me keep track of things so I know where they go later. Simple thing, but helps you stay organized, and it helps to take some pictures ahead of time too, so you know what you've removed, and maybe when you're putting it back together you can use those as a reference to see where everything goes. But to start, we'll go with our little fan. I see we're missing a bolt. Don't know if that bolt's broken or just missing in action. And that should have our fan off, like so. It does appear that we have a broken bolt in there, so we'll deal with him in good time. From there, if we want to pull our belts, there's this little Allen head and lock nut up here on top. That's going to be a 1/2 inch that we might just be able to turn them both with just this 1/2 inch wrench if I can get it squared away. We're just going to loosen it. And with that, we have to play the game of guess the size. I've got my little selection of USA sized wrenches. Let's take a wager and look, too small. This one up. Seems like we got a good fit. And we'll simply just undo him. For those that care, that is a 5/16. I probably should have gone with the even size to begin with. That makes the most sense. So we'll loosen him up more or less all the way. You don't have to go all the way, but I just do because I know there's nothing holding him back. And it's not likely you'll turn it by hand. A brass punch may be helpful. Friction of the belt's gonna hold us in place there. There we go. Well, it doesn't help if you're turning the whole pulley. But again, we're doing this one-handed for the sake of education and entertainment both. I don't know if that's in the, yeah, we're just gonna pull him all the way off, or at least get our belt off of there. Now with that part removed, just to be sensible, we can put our lock nut and screw back in there. Pop off our belt. This belt runs the not only the generator but also the, well, first one's obviously the crankshaft to water pump drive. This one is the water pump to generator to, in this case, power steering pump drive. Not all tractors had power steering. So that takes us to, where are those little bolts that secure our water pump to the engine block? So where indeed are those bolts that hold the water pump to the engine block? Imagine there's one in here. Clean him out. There should be one somewhere over in here. I think we got him. Well, yeah. It's either right there. I also got to mind that we have that return hose, or that return pipe is over there. You've got a couple bolts holding him in, sort of the same style, that Allen head style. One there and one there. So the one we want is this one here. So we'll work on getting those two out. The third one is over here. And we'll have to pay attention on this one. I believe there's supposed to be, behind this bolt as it goes in, a little shim that sits in between the water pump and the block. So we got to remember to grab that and not lose it. It's kind of a thin one. It's not just your standard washer. One bolt is longer than the other, so something to note there. One thing we can do while we're here is remove this tube. It's seen its better days. Original John Deere hardware is this squeeze type clamp. It's got the two little prongs that you squeeze together. The screw type one, somebody has replaced that in the past. So original, not original. I used to fumble with these for years with a set of pliers until I just sucked it up and bought this specific set that's supposed to, when used appropriately. There we go. Squeeze that. Put him down there. Oh yeah. I don't think there's any coolant issues going on in there at all. I think we're going to be in good shape once we get to see what's on the inside. And if I'm remembering right, this governor linkage over here kind of makes it a little tricky to get our, there we are, to get our hose, our return line there free. So we're going to pull that little pin. We're going to pull this little pin. There's a little cotter key down below here that we can pull out. Little cotter key. Again, I don't even know where you're looking. You might be in the view. So cotter key comes out. Pull that pin out. Take that little arm off. Try and put it back in place for the time being. Maybe another thing that'd be good to put in our little bag. I think with this one, I might be able to work with that. So off to our other side. Finish taking that one out. Very technical light span bucket holding the light up. The glare and the angle are terrible, I'm sure. just adds to the excitement. Okay. Oops. So we've got our bolt. And, did you see that? Our little shim just fell down in there. It's kind of a thin one, so important to keep track of that. And then we are free. Moved over to the right side of the engine block, right side as you sit on the tractor. We'll go ahead and remove our distributor. The distributor is held in with two little 1/2-inch head bolts and special clips. The clips secure the distributor to the engine block snug so it doesn't spin. And that's how the timing is adjusted, is rotating the distributor to advance or retard your timing. These two little bolts will come out fairly easily. At the bottom of the distributor is it's like a coupling that meshes together with the oil pump. The oil pump's tied into the camshaft with a little gear, and all that spinning is what rotates all the little magical parts inside that help distribute the spark. So we'll go ahead and pull him out here. These old engines originally had points and condensers that make the spark happen. When we put this back together, we may go to it's called an electronic ignition, which eliminates the need for points and condensers because they have a tendency to corrode and be finicky if your tractor sits for any period of time. Clean up some of the extra dust from back there, and we should lift out fairly easy. There's the little key at the bottom that fits into the lock or the receptacle at the bottom of the oil pump. Doesn't look it maybe too obviously, but there is a little offset there, so I think it can only go in one way or one position on the oil pump. Go ahead and, for good measure, take our rag and put it in that hole. While we have our distributor off, we might as well take a quick peek on the inside and see what kind of fun stuff is in there. I am no engineer or electronical expert, so take my explanations with a grain of salt, but there's a wire that comes in from the coil, goes to the center. 2 wires will go out to the 2 spark plugs. Pop off our cap, maybe. Yeah. Under the cap, we have a rotor. The rotor will spin around on the inside of the distributor as the engine turns. As it spins around, it'll make contact with the 2 contact points in the cap. That's what's going to send spark to the spark plugs. Pull our cap. Under our dust cover, we have condenser and the set of points. And what the set of points are supposed to do is, as the distributor spins, they open and close. And as they open and close, the spark's generated, and when those contacts break, and that's what's sent up to the spark plugs. We're probably going to eliminate these because they can be a little finicky. Even looking at that one, it looks a little aged in there, so try and modernize it up a little bit without looking too gaudy. That is some of the distributor insides. Now you know. Under the distributor, we have our tachometer drive. I'd love to tell you I know exactly what size that tachometer drive is, but it's this size. So what we'll do is just give that a little turn. Just threads right out of the block. Many tractors, this was an option. You'll simply see it's the equivalent probably of a freeze plug in there on a lot of tractors where the tachometer wasn't standard equipment. It was an add-on. There should be a little fiber gear on the end of that. That also meshes in with the, can't remember if it's the oil pump or if it's the camshaft gear. There's something that meshes into where it all spins, and as it rotates, there's a cable that should go up to the tachometer on the engine, not the engine, the dash panel. I'm thinking of engine, talking about dash panels. So yeah, with that out, we can plug up that hole just for the time being. And we'll go ahead and might as well take off our oil filter housing while we're here. The shop dog's hanging around here today, so if you see her passing around in the background, she's just curious. Likes to see what we're up to at times. Other times she just goes and takes a nap. But it's Lucy, in case you're curious. Three little, 2 bolts, 1 nut and stud hold this together. And yeah, I remember what I said about not using my hand as a hammer, so we'll use a wrench instead. It makes sense. I have not yet drained the oil out of this engine block, so I hope there's not going to be a flood of it that's going to come down when we take our little housing assembly off. And one could take this can off the top. It just, well, wise to do this before you loosen all the other components. But there's this big old nut on the top. Hopefully we don't get a big old mess on the underside. There we go. And off we go. Just a simple cover for our oil filter. One thing, I don't know if it's there. There's supposed to be this plate on the bottom of our oil filter. A lot of times that sticks to this filter just as you saw it sticking there, and it gets thrown away. So if you have a tractor, you're doing an oil change, mind that you keep that plate and have it ready to go back in your housing once you've taken your filter out. And with that out of there, and we can maybe spin him back. There's a little gasket between the, I guess, the shell and the base that you'll want to replace too when changing your oil. With that, you should come off. I bet you there's going to be a little leak. So put that down there. Hopefully not too bad. It's been sitting for a while, so everything should drain. Should have drained. Ah, there's the leak on my hands. And that is your oil filter base, cover, and electrical sender. And this is simply threaded into the base on the 430 models. Again, a 420 or a 320 or a 40 would have had an oil pressure gauge that just mounts in right here. So this was unique to the 430s and the 330s. Next up, we are going to attempt to remove our intake and exhaust manifold. Under most circumstances, this removal is fairly straightforward. There are 4 bolts that hold the manifold snugly to the cylinder head. This is not the average everyday removal though, because the standard bolt is a 9/16 head. These 2 longer bolts have obviously been corroded and are no longer that size. We're going to have to come up with some creative ways of getting those out, but I believe the 2 smaller bolts should come out with not too much of a challenge. Let's see what you can see up here. There we go. Get you a good view. Yeah. That one's not even tight at all. I believe this is the original manifold to this engine. This tractor was originally shipped with a, it's called an orchard exhaust, meaning the manifold's going to direct the muffler down below instead of above the hood. Yeah, this one here, a little tighter, but I think there must have been a washer in there that's no longer with us, because this is a stud and nut assembly here, not so much a bolt. So I stand corrected on the 4 bolts comment, and that may prove a little tricky because of the clearance issue we have there between that and where that stud is. If I am unable to remove those longer bolts, I had a plan where if I can get these two and one of these two out, I can simply spin the manifold around, but we'll see what we get here if I can get this guy off. See how far out he comes. Yeah, he's still got some purchase in that head, I believe. Well, we'll come back to that. Although I think it's got to be right there. We'll see. Maybe do something where we try and spin the nut off or something of similar nature. I was playing around with this a little bit earlier. I haven't messed around with this bolt head yet, but I was trying to see if I could tap a socket on the end going down from size to size until I could find one that would fit comfortably on that bolt head. And what I came up with was about a 10 millimeter, and we're going to try to tap that on. That 10 millimeters a bit tight. The socket don't do it, the wrench might. And just like that, we are getting a little bit of spin. Oh, and it may take a time or two of seating the wrench on there and turning, because this is obviously not the right size. We're kind of working with what we've got. Little by little. Magic. I would not have expected that to come out that easy. Odds are the next one is not going to come out that easy. See how nubbed down that head is on that bolt. Kind of good to keep that for a reference so we know what size goes back in. I don't know if it's worth trying this one. We'll give it a shot. I don't have enough meat on this bolt head to tap my wrench on, it seems. The thicker part of the manifold here makes that a bit of a challenge as well. not enough there. What we could do with this, and I'm gonna have to wait a little bit because I'm getting ready to head home for supper. I can take a grinder, grind down what's left of that head, hopefully then be able to pull the manifold away from the engine, and we can always get that rest of that bolt out once the manifold's clear. It's just supper time, and I don't want to put sparks in the shop before I leave, so we'll delay that until the next taping, and we'll see if we can get it off at that point. So the goal here is to shave the head of that bolt off, to release some of the potential pressure it was putting on the manifold, snugging it to the cylinder head. This way maybe I get some ability to pull away from the head a little bit, start some rotation. Normally there would be a bolt holding this standard exhaust manifold into the cylinder head back here. This one has because of the clearance, the Orchard manifold has the stud and the nut set up. I could probably either cut that out. I'm not trying to save it if I can to potentially reuse the stud, but we'll see what we can do to wiggle some things around here and maybe get some clearance. Yes, I got a little close to my intake with the grinder, but in all honesty, I didn't plan on reusing this manifold anyway. I suppose if that was the case, I could just take a hammer to it and smash it off, but we'll try and spare ourselves from getting to that point just yet. I'm applying pressure with the bar and just I'm thinking if I can get this stud out of here, and I've shaved this nut down with the grinder, I turn it to the position where maybe I get a little bit of clearance to kind of pop him out of there. That gives me just enough to get past that manifold. Put the hammer and a little punch and see if we can't drive him past there. There, we've been able to drive that stud out a little farther, so there should in theory be nothing else holding the manifold to the block other than this stud here, so we could even potentially spin the whole thing off. We shall see. Yes, like that. Like that. Pull him out. As long as nothing is. So we are at a point where our manifold is loose, but our stud or our old bolt is more or less corroded to the manifold. It's turning with the manifold when I turn it, and I'm not going to get enough leverage to pull it out away. I can spin it off the cylinder head, but attached to the engine block there's this ear right here that the manifold is hitting against. So I'm going to go ahead and eventually pull the head, and then we'll spin the manifold off that way. There are a couple other things on the block we'll tend to first. One curiosity I noticed when I moved that down is there's some stuff up in here that maybe isn't going to be the best for a running engine. Looks like a mouse has made himself a home in there, so I'll be curious to see what the underneath the valve cover looks like, and hopefully it's not too corroded. Hopefully it's savable. We'll dig in, we'll find out. Water manifold has 4 bolts that hold it in place, 1/2 inch head. 1, 2, 3. The 4th one, I had to take these 2 off previously because there's a throttle linkage that mounts above this. When I was taking the whole tractor apart, that came off. I'm going to say I know I have that bolt somewhere, and hopefully I do, but we'll just go ahead and pop that off real fast. Water manifold. There's a little oil line that runs up, this might be the pressure line that runs up to the cylinder head. You have to pull that off before, I think that's a 3/8, so I'm going to have to go get a smaller wrench, but we'll take that off before we go ahead and pull our head. Alright, the time has come to spin the two nuts off of our valve cover here. See what kind of damage the mice have done on the inside. The lesson to you kids is to keep your exhaust ports and intake ports covered. If they can find a way to find shelter in your engine, the mice will do it. I hate mices to pieces. There's one. It's 11/16 head nut, if you're curious about the size on this one. Sometimes, not necessarily with the valve cover, but these same studs that you're seeing pop up through the valve cover hold a rocker shaft assembly in place under there. I've had these turn out just by turning the nut. This one, with all the scuzz up on there, he's getting a little tight, so yeah, we'll go ahead and juice him up a little bit. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. Underneath these nuts there is a washer and a little cork gasket that holds the oil at bay and keeps it from spilling out over the top of your cover. Sometimes they're on there pretty tightly. Washer. And that little cork gasket doesn't look like much, but sometimes it does a good job of holding that cover to the stud. Yeah. This one looks like someone over-tightened them sometime here in the past. No gasket on that one. So, are we ready for the big reveal? Let's see what lays. See what's hiding underneath our valve cover. No, not too bad. We're going to have a mouse nest in our engine block, most likely. So far so good here. Two more nuts hold the rockery arm unit. On top of the cylinder head, we've got 4 push rods. Now those shall all come out very similarly. Box end wrench, probably a good idea for this. Once you break that initial tension, these thread off of here pretty quick and pretty easy. One of these studs has a flat groove in it. I can't remember if it's the front stud or the back stud, this one or this one. It allows the oil to either be pumped up or drain back. I don't know which one goes where. Well, we'll find out as soon as we take our rocker arm cover off here. Get our rocker arm unit off. Yeah, this back one. The back stud, and of course we've got the light blinding you. But right there, and I'll get the light over here to show it better. You've got a flat spot in that stud, and that's an oil passage. It's important that that stud goes back in that position on the cylinder head if you pull the stud out, which we'll probably do at some point. We're going to take this head, we're going to send it to the machine shop, get cleaned, pressure tested, put some new valves in it, all provided, of course, that you know, there's no leaks or cracks or anything like that. So with that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 head bolts that hold our cylinder head to the engine block, and we'll get the right size socket, bigger socket wrench to pop those off. Pop off the head bolts. I'm going to use a 13/16 socket on my bar. And there's the one we're waiting for. Last bolt. Okay. Now in theory, you should be able to give a little bit of a tap. And our cylinder head is ready to come off. Let's see what fantastic stuff awaits us down on the inside. Oh yeah. All kinds of fun mousy material in there. Well, luckily it's not too deep. Mr. Mouse is probably just using that as a place to eat a snack and not so much make a home, which is going to be helpful when it comes time to taking a look at our cylinder walls and everything in there. It looks pretty dry and not too rusty, so that makes me a little happy looking at that. Curious to see what bore, if this is a standard bore, if this block's ever been, I doubt it ever has, but standards, I think 4.5 or something like that, as far as 4.25 diameter of the pistons. That's going to take us to being able, at this point, to spin, hopefully, our exhaust manifold off our head. Bring us full circle to exhaust manifold removal. And with that, if I want this apart, I can heat this up and I'll be able to pound that old stud bolt out of there. So there's our manifold. He's an industrious little mouse. Oh, we're gonna get all that stuff up in there. I guess I had the valve must have been open. I closed it when I took the rocker arm assembly off. We still have our gasket on right here. Oh, forgive the angle. This is all crawling around the floor and not very professional as far as my setup today goes, but the quality that counts as far as the content, I guess. We'll give everything a good cleaning. If I see an obvious crack before I guess going to the machine shop, there's no point in sending it if we see an issue. A lot of times in between the two valves, the potential for crack is there with all the expansion, contraction, heat, cooling, a lot of forces playing on the metal. The pressure, cylinder heads have a tendency of getting a little pressure crack or some weakness, and we don't want that. So we're going to send it out and get it checked. And with that, cylinder heads off, we can move on to something else, maybe the hydraulic pump, clutch. Stay tuned, I'm sure you'll see and find out.